And welcome back. We're with Andy Lloyd. He is the author of the book, The Dark Star, his theories on NIBIRU and brown dwarfs. Andy, you said that science is catching up with Planet X. Explain that.
One of the great movements forward with science in the last 10 or 15 years has been their ability to be able to find objects at the very edge of the solar system. I'll run you through the planets real fast. We start with the Sun, we move to Mercury, Venus, to the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Now, those are the planets that we can see in the sky with our visible eye.
Right.
You go past Saturn, which is a very considerable distance out, really, compared to us, and you get to Uranus, and then you get up to Neptune. And Neptune's sort of the border, really the border of the solar system. Pluto moves outside the orbit of Neptune. Now, there's the asteroid belt that we know about between Mars and Jupiter, but there is a second asteroid belt, which people don't know about very much. And that second asteroid belt is located beyond Neptune, and it's called the Kuiper Belt. Well, you Americans call it the Kuiper Belt.
Or no, we call it the Kuiper Belt here.
The Kuiper Belt, I apologize. After Gerald, who would presumably be Kuiper, we call it the Edgeworth Kuiper Belt because there was a Brit who found it first, but there we go. So anyway, this belt beyond Neptune, we're just starting to find those objects. And they found the first object, I think, back in 1991 or 92. And since then, there's been this sort of avalanche of discoveries about these objects.
Were these, a planet that didn't form or a planet that blew up?
No, there just seem to be leftover fragments from the solar system. They're effectively like the asteroids between Mars and Jupiter, and it's this belt of them. And there was a theoretical model that suggested that they would be there, but it's only really in the last 10 or 15 years that we've actually been able to locate them. And more are being found all the time. Now, theoretically, they should be somewhat attached to Neptune. The planet Neptune is a big influence out in the outer solar system, and it should be a sort of shepherd to the sheep. And they're the little sheep that are going around outside it, and it sort of shepherds them along. And Pluto's the same. Pluto's sort of, Neptune's Pluto's shepherd. And the problem is that the belt isn't really as it's supposed to be. And this is very important because the theoretical underpinning of what it should look like, it doesn't work. In practice, it's not behaving itself. The objects out there, quite a few of them, are doing some really, really weird things. And some of them are in very scattered orbits. They're moving at strangely inclined orbits, or they're just not behaving themselves at all. The shepherd isn't doing the business.
Something playing with them?
Exactly. Now, astronomers have been scratching their head about this for about a decade, and each new anomaly that pops up creates more sort of data for them to try and grind, to try and figure what's going on. There is a genuine mystery here, George. I really want to put this across because this is really, really important. This isn't just me making something up off the top of my head to try and, say my theory's right or what have you. Irrespective of whether my brown dwarf idea is correct, there is something genuinely mysterious out there. They don't understand it. And if you ask 3 different astronomers, you'll get 3 different answers about what might be going on out there. So they have various ideas. One of them is that the sun passed close to another star at one point and tugged some of them out. Another idea is that Neptune migrated, it moved, and then moved back again. I mean, they're pretty wild theories, really, to try and explain these anomalies. One of them is that the solar system interacted with what are called gigantic molecular clouds. And then the fourth idea of this little run is that there is a brown dwarf out there. And that's not me, that's them. So when you actually read some of these papers, the astronomical papers, I'm not going to bore you to tears by reading them because they're heavy, and your readers aren't necessarily going to want to listen to me quote from scientific papers. But when you read them and you spot things like that, you spot things like, well, it could be a passing star or it could be a companion brown dwarf. Well, obviously, from my point of view, that really jumps out at me because 10 years ago, no one would give that idea the time of day. And now it's appearing in academic papers. So this is why science is catching up with fiction, or at least it's catching up with this idea of a brown dwarf.
Isn't science also mystified about Pioneers 10 and 11? Is it that seems to be changing? Something's speeding them up? They can't figure it out?
Yes. One of the scientists who's been working on this for a long time is a man called John Anderson, and he worked out at JPL for many years on the Voyager and Pioneer. And he's actually always been quite interested in the Planet X idea as a scientist. And he's been working this on a long time, and there really isn't actually an answer to that anomaly. It's a long-standing anomaly. No one's cracked it. They've moved from, is it an object that's pulling these Pioneer spacecraft in some way, or do you need to actually change the laws of physics? It goes to that sort of extent. My argument with this is that the Sun and the binary companion create a more complex gravitational system, and that the entire mass of the solar system is greater because of the addition of this brown dwarf. And if you take it as a whole, then that greater gravity of the system is going to slow down the spacecraft. That's kind of my take on this. So that's one of a number of anomalies. There are others. Do you want me to tell you about them?
Yeah, give us a few.
The problem with all this, Lark, is it's a little bit technical and it involves a bit of knowledge, so you'll have to bear with me as I work through them a little bit.
This is an extremely intelligent audience, Andy.
Good. I'm very pleased to hear that.
They all have PhDs in astronomy.
The Kuiper belt, which we've just been discussing, not only has objects that are flung around in odd ways, like Sedna and 2000 CR105 and Xena, which is now called Eris, and Makey, I think they've just named one of them, and various other anomalous objects which get people scratching their heads. But it also has a cut-off point where it should sort of, like our asteroid belts, sort of drift out and be concentrated in the middle and just sort of phase out. It stops dead around about 50 astronomical units away. This is unexpected, and it requires a bit of explanation from scientists. And they call this the truncation of the Kuiper belt and Kuiper belt, or they call it the Kuiper cliff or the Kuiper gap. They've put various labels on it. And they don't know why there's this cutoff point. Work by a physicist called Lynn Allen is the person to have a look at in terms of describing this effect. So again, various possibilities have been put forward. And one of the, sort of mainstream favourites, by no means settled, is that there was a close flyby of a star which caused this truncation. But in actual fact, some work that's been done by a professor called Alice Quillen has indicated that this isn't necessarily the case. The shape of the disk is more in keeping with other disks that we see around new stars that are binary stars. So that when you compare the shape of the outer solar system with these young protoplanetary disks around young stars, you kind of have to come to the conclusion that at some point in the past, the sun was a binary system. So again, this isn't me. This is coming out of scientific papers.
So this all points that there's a number of objects somewhere out there that could be having an effect on other objects.
Yes.
In your theory, of course, it being the brown dwarf.
Exactly. Now, there's another chap who's very interested in discovering these objects called Mike Brown, and he's a professor, I think he's out of Caltech, possibly. And he's been quoted various times as saying, there might be something out there moving these things in the past. And this is what they all say. They all say at the early point in the solar system, there may well have been something moving around out beyond the sun that carved its way through the outer solar system, swept out some of these comets, can explain why there's missing comets from the Kuiper belt, and, but we don't know where it is. It should be there, but it's gone, so let's assume it's left. So that's their argument, you see, because it's a bit of a stretch to say it's still there for them, because then they have to explain why we haven't found it.
Now,
It's easy for me to say that, but not easy for them to say.